It was a quiet morning in the small town of Greenville. The local diner, a cozy place with red leather booths and the smell of bacon and fresh coffee floating in the air, was filling up with its usual crowd. Retired workers, truck drivers passing through, and a few young folks grabbing breakfast before heading to their jobs. It was the kind of place where people knew each other by name, where the waitress poured your coffee before you even asked, and where the jukebox in the corner carried the soft hum of old blues songs. At the corner booth sat Mr. Charles Johnson, a black elderly man in his late 70s. His back was slightly hunched, his hand calloused from years of hard work, and his eyes held the deep weight of time. He wore a simple jacket, one that looked worn but clean, and on the breast pocket was a small pin, a medal that hinted at a history most didn't know. Charles was a veteran. He had served his country with honor decades ago, back when times were different and when the uniform on his back meant everything. Yet, despite the battles he had fought overseas, life had often reminded him that being a black man in America carried its own silent wars. But Charles never carried bitterness. He believed in respect, kindness, and discipline. As he quietly stirred his coffee and glanced at the newspaper, the bell above the door jingled. In walked a young man, tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying himself with the swagger of someone who believed the world owed him something. His name was Derek Collins, though around town folks just called him Trouble. Derek had a reputation, loud, cocky, quick to pick fights. He was the kind of bully who enjoyed making others feel small just to make himself feel big. The waitress, Sally, shifted uncomfortably as Derek walked in. She knew his type too well. "Morning, Derek," she muttered, forcing a smile. "Coffee, black, and make it quick," Derek barked, sliding into a booth with his boots up on the seat. He looked around, his eyes scanning the diner like a predator searching for prey. And then he noticed Charles sitting alone. Something about Charles's calm demeanor irritated Derek. The veteran wasn't looking for trouble, he was simply enjoying his morning. But Derek couldn't stand the sight of someone who looked peaceful when he himself thrived on chaos. "Hey, old man," Derek called across the diner, smirking. "You're in my seat." Charles looked up slowly, his deep, steady eyes meeting Derek's. His voice was calm but firm. "Son, I've been sitting here every morning for the last 15 years. Nobody's seat but mine." The diner grew quiet. A few heads turned, sensing the tension. Derek chuckled mockingly and stood up, walking over to Charles's booth. He leaned down, his face inches from the veteran's. "I don't care if you've been sitting here for 15 years or 50. When I want a seat, I get it. You hearing me, old man?" Charles set his coffee down gently. He didn't flinch, didn't back away. He had faced worse, real danger, real enemies, real war. This was just a boy playing tough. "Young man," Charles said slowly, "respect is something you give if you ever hope to earn it. Sit somewhere else, and let's leave it at that." The word stung Derek's pride. Laughter bubbled up from a few customers who couldn't help but admire Charles's calm strength. That laughter was like gasoline on Derek's fire. His face twisted in anger. Without warning, Derek's hand shot out. Smack! The sound of the slap echoed through the diner. Charles's glasses fell onto the table. The old man's cheek reddened, but he didn't lift a hand in retaliation. He simply looked up at Derek, his eyes steady, his dignity unshaken. The diner went silent. Sally gasped, covering her mouth. An older truck driver stood halfway from his seat as if ready to step in, but he froze, unsure. Everyone was shocked. "Didn't think so," Derek sneered, puffing his chest. "That's what happens when you don't show me respect." Charles quietly reached for his glasses, sliding them back onto his face. He didn't speak, he didn't rise. His silence carried more weight than any words could. And then Derek laughed, turning to the room. "What, y'all gonna do something, huh?" His arrogance filled the air like poison. But what Derek didn't know was that the man he had just slapped wasn't just some old nobody. Charles was the father of David Johnson, a man whose name carried weight in Washington, D.C., a man who wasn't just influential, but held one of the highest security positions in the nation. David Johnson was the head of Homeland Security. At that very moment, David was in his office miles away, going through briefing documents, unaware of the humiliation his father was enduring. But fate has a way of tying moments together, and soon the slap that Derek delivered in arrogance would set off a chain of events he could never have imagined. Back in the diner, Charles finally spoke. His voice was soft but carried across the silent room. "Son, you don't know the storm you just called down on yourself." Derek scoffed. "Yeah, what storm? You're just an old man with no teeth left. You ain't gonna do nothin'." But the crowd whispered among themselves. Everyone in town knew Charles had a son in government. Not all knew exactly what position he held, but they knew it was powerful. And word spreads fast. Sally leaned toward Charles, her hands trembling. "Mr. Johnson, you want me to call someone? Maybe David?" Charles shook his head. "No, Sally. Let him bury himself in his own foolishness." But Derek wasn't done. He pushed Charles's cup of coffee over, spilling it across the table. "Guess you're not thirsty anymore, huh?" The crowd stirred uneasily. No one wanted to step in directly, afraid of Derek's violent temper, but the disgust was clear on every face. Charles stood slowly this time. Though his frame was old, there was strength in the way he rose. He looked Derek dead in the eye and said, "I fought for this country so boys like you could grow up free. And this is how you repay your elders, with disrespect, with violence?" For the first time, Derek hesitated. Something in Charles's voice, the weight of history, the unshakable presence of a man who had survived wars, cut through his arrogance. But Derek quickly masked it with another laugh. "Spare me the war stories, Grandpa. Nobody cares what you did 50 years ago." Charles didn't respond. He simply gathered his newspaper, folded it neatly, and walked toward the door. The diner watched in silence as the old veteran stepped out into the sunlight, leaving Derek there standing like a fool who thought he'd won. But Derek hadn't won. He had just lit a fuse, and that fuse was about to burn straight to Washington, because within an hour, pictures and videos began spreading. Someone in the diner had recorded everything on their phone: the slap, the humiliation, the elderly veteran's calm response. And once people recognized who Charles Johnson was, once they connected him to the head of Homeland Security, the story caught fire. By afternoon, Derek's name was on everyone's lips, and by evening, it wasn't just a diner incident anymore, it was national news. The bully who thought he'd just slapped an old man was about to learn what it meant to pick the wrong target. By the time the afternoon sun dipped low, the video had already gone viral. Clips of the diner incident spread across social media like wildfire. The sight of an elderly black veteran being slapped by a younger man struck a nerve with the public. People were outraged, not only because of the disrespect shown to an elder, but because Charles Johnson carried himself with such dignity, refusing to be broken even in humiliation. And soon, someone connected the dots. A commenter posted, "That's Charles Johnson, father of David Johnson, head of Homeland Security." That was all it took. The story wasn't just local anymore, it was national. News anchors debated it on television. Bloggers wrote think pieces about it. Commentators argued over what the government should do. And Derek Collins, who had strutted out of the diner thinking he'd proven himself, had no idea his name and face were being broadcast across the country. But one person who saw the video stopped breathing for a moment when the image flashed across his screen. David Johnson himself. David was in the middle of a security briefing in Washington, D.C. when his phone buzzed. At first he ignored it, but when it buzzed again and again, he excused himself and glanced at the screen. A flood of messages, links, and clips filled his inbox. He clicked one, and there it was. The video of his father, the slap, the humiliation. David's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tightened. The staff in the room noticed the sudden change in his demeanor, the controlled, steady Homeland Security chief suddenly radiating fury. "Sir?" one of his aides asked cautiously. David didn't answer right away. He replayed the video, watching Derek's smirk, the slap, the coffee spilled across the table, the laughter. And then his father's calm, dignified words. Finally, David spoke. His voice was cold. "Clear my schedule for the rest of the day." Within the hour, David was on a plane back to Greenville. His aides tried to advise him otherwise, that he shouldn't get personally involved, that optics mattered, that his position required restraint. But David didn't care about optics. This wasn't about politics. This was about his father. Meanwhile, in Greenville, Derek was basking in his false glory. He told his friends about the diner incident, twisting the story to make himself look like the hero. "That old man got what was coming," he bragged in the bar. "Nobody talks back to me. Nobody." But the smiles around him were thin, nervous. Because while Derek thought he'd gained respect, the truth was everyone knew he'd crossed a line. People whispered behind his back. Some even told him directly, "You're in trouble, man. That wasn't just any old man." Derek brushed it off. What's he gonna do? Write me a letter? Please. He didn't realize that his face was already plastered across news channels. His arrogance blinded him to the storm heading straight for him. That evening, Charles sat quietly at home. He hadn't told David what happened. He didn't want to worry his son. He believed in letting life take care of its own balance. But the phone on his nightstand wouldn't stop ringing. Neighbors called, old friends called, even journalists called, asking for comments. Charles answered none of them. He simply sipped his tea and shook his head. "Foolish boy," he muttered to himself, thinking of Derek. "He don't know what he's done." A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to see his son, David, standing there, still in his suit from Washington, his eyes filled with both worry and rage. "Dad," David's voice cracked slightly, something it rarely did. "Why didn't you call me?" Charles gave a small smile. "Because it wasn't your burden to carry, son. Just a slap from a foolish boy. Nothing more." "Nothing more?" David snapped. "They disrespected you in public. They humiliated you. You're a veteran, Dad. You gave your life to this country, and some punk thinks he can lay a hand on you and walk away? No, not while I'm alive." Charles placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "David, listen to me. Respect isn't forced. It's earned. That boy, he's already shown the world what kind of man he is. The whole country knows it now. You don't need to fight this battle for me." But David wasn't convinced. "It's not just about you, Dad. It's about what it represents, about the message it sends when someone thinks they can get away with this. He picked the wrong man, and I won't let it slide." The father and son locked eyes, one preaching patience, the other burning with the fire of justice. Later that night, Derek got his first real wake-up call. As he stumbled out of the bar, a group of reporters swarmed him. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved in his face. "Derek Collins, did you really assault a veteran in a diner? Are you aware he's the father of Homeland Security Chief David Johnson? Do you have anything to say to the American people?" Derek panicked. He shoved past them, muttering curses. But the damage was done. His face, his name, his arrogance, all captured, all broadcasted. By the next morning, David Johnson held a press conference. The world watched as he stood at the podium, his voice steady but charged with emotion. My father is a proud veteran who has always believed in the values of respect and honor. Yesterday, he was assaulted in a diner for no reason other than the arrogance of a bully. Let me be clear, this is not just about my father. This is about every veteran who has ever been disrespected, every elder who has been mistreated, and every person who thinks they can demean others without consequence. There will be accountability. The room erupted with questions, cameras flashing, but David said nothing more. He stepped away, leaving his statement hanging in the air like a thunderclap. For Derek, the walls were closing in. His phone buzzed with threats, insults, and messages of hate. Employers who once tolerated his behavior cut ties with him. Old friends distanced themselves. He was being cornered by a nation that no longer found him amusing, but dangerous. And yet, in his arrogance, he still tried to fight back. He posted a video online trying to defend himself. Look, I didn't know who he was, okay? I didn't know he was some government guy's dad. I was just teaching him a lesson. People need to respect me, too. But instead of gaining sympathy, his words poured gasoline on the fire. Comments flooded in. Respect you? You slapped a 78-year-old man. You're done, buddy. Finished. You picked the wrong family. Behind closed doors, David was already in meetings, not just as a son, but as a man of power. Homeland Security wasn't a weapon for personal vendettas, but influence. Influence could move mountains. David didn't have to lift a hand against Derek. The system, the people, the nation itself were already moving. And Derek was about to learn the hard way what it meant when justice came knocking, not with fists, but with the full weight of consequence. The storm Charles had warned about was no longer on the horizon. It was here. The storm had broken wide open. By the third day, Derek's name was everywhere. News headlines, talk shows, and trending hashtags. His arrogant smirk from the diner video became the face of entitlement. He wasn't just a local bully anymore. He had become a symbol of everything wrong with disrespect, arrogance, and ignorance. While the world debated him, Derek tried to hide. His phone never stopped ringing. His social media accounts were flooded with anger, and reporters camped outside his small apartment. Every knock at the door made his stomach drop. He thought about running, but where would he go? Meanwhile, inside the Johnson household, Charles sat calmly in his favorite chair, sipping tea as though nothing in his life had changed. His son David, however, was restless, pacing the room. "Dad," David said sharply, "it's not enough. He humiliated you. He humiliated us. I can't just let this die down." Charles looked up, his voice soft but firm. "Son, you have to remember something. Power isn't about crushing the weak. It's about showing restraint. That boy already destroyed himself. You don't need to lift a finger." David clenched his fists. "But he doesn't deserve to walk around free after this." Charles leaned forward, locking eyes with his son. "Listen to me, David. If you use your position to punish him, you become no different than him, using strength to intimidate. Let the world handle him. The court of public opinion is harsher than any cell." David didn't want to admit it, but he knew his father was right. His father always had a way of seeing deeper into things. The very next morning, Derek finally realized just how deep the consequences went. He walked into his job, or tried to. His manager was waiting at the door. "Derek," the man said coldly, "don't bother coming in. You're finished here. We don't need the attention, and we don't want you on our team." Derek argued, pleaded, shouted, But it didn't matter. He was fired. And word spread fast. No other local businesses would take him in. Later that day, he went to grab lunch at a fast food place. The moment he stepped in, people whispered. Phones came out. One man muttered loud enough for him to hear, "That's him, the guy who slapped the old veteran." A mother pulled her child away from the line. Another customer spat on the ground near him. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. Derek stormed out, realizing he couldn't even buy a burger without the weight of the world crushing him. By evening, Derek sat alone in his dark apartment. For the first time, the cocky smirk was gone. He stared at the walls, haunted by what he had done. He thought about the slap, about the old man's steady eyes, about the calm way Charles had handled it. Why didn't he fight back? Why didn't he yell? The silence, it had been worse than any punch. And now Derek's own silence was deafening. But while Derek spiraled, the Johnsons found themselves visited by reporters. Cameras filled Charles's yard. Neighbors waved flags to honor him. Veterans from across the country sent letters and messages of support. One veteran wrote, "Your calmness showed the world what real strength looks like." Charles read every letter slowly, humbly. He never asked for this attention, but he accepted it with grace. He didn't want revenge. He wanted understanding. A week later, the inevitable happened. Derek was arrested. Not because David demanded it, but because the evidence was undeniable. Assault charges were filed, and the court system moved swiftly thanks to the overwhelming public pressure. In court, Derek sat slouched, his once cocky frame looking smaller than ever. His lawyer argued for leniency, saying it was just a moment of poor judgment. But the prosecution played the video on a giant screen for the jury. The slap, the laughter, the spilled coffee. The jury didn't just see a slap, they saw disrespect. They saw arrogance. They saw a man who thought he was untouchable. When the verdict came guilty, Derek's head dropped. He was sentenced to time in county jail along with mandatory community service with veterans. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The bully who once slapped a veteran would now serve them. After the sentencing, Charles and David walked out of the courthouse together. Reporters swarmed, microphones outstretched. "Mr. Johnson, do you feel justice was served?" one asked. Charles paused, then answered calmly. "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. The young man learned a lesson, maybe the hardest of his life. I hope he uses it to grow into someone better." His words spread across the nation again, quoted in newspapers and repeated on television. The old veteran who had been slapped now stood as a symbol of wisdom, forgiveness, and strength. That evening, father and son sat on the porch together, watching the sunset. David finally broke the silence. "Dad, I wanted to destroy him. I wanted to use everything I had to make him pay. But you were right. The world took care of it without me lifting a hand." Charles smiled faintly. That's because true justice doesn't come from anger. It comes from truth. And the truth has a way of shining through, no matter how dark things seem. David leaned back, taking a deep breath. For the first time since he saw the video, the tightness in his chest eased. As the night settled in, Charles whispered one last thought. "Son, sometimes the greatest strength a man can show is knowing when not to fight." The lesson was clear. The bully had thought he was strong when he used his hand to strike, but the real strength had been in the man who didn't strike back, the man who held his dignity, his patience, and his peace. And in the end, the world saw the difference.